Hey, everybody, this is Kenny. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is the podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. I got to speak to the founder and CEO of Gyan, and that would be Neha Naik. And Neha just brought so much leadership knowledge to the table from a recruiting perspective, but also from a leadership perspective. Neha talked about first impression systems, cohesive culture method, Compass leadership systems. Some of the things that she has in place are just spectacular and just great advice for you as leaders as you go out there and you try to not only get but retain the best talent. She also will talk about how important it is to bring those retention rates down, something we may not talk about enough. And how can you be empathetic when recruiting? You don't want to miss a second of this. Let's get at it.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. I have got a terrific guest today who is a leader, but is really going to be talking about leadership from a bit of a different perspective. And I know that leaders out there, you're going to need to hear what she has to say today. So without further ado, I want to introduce the founder and CEO of Gyan. I probably pronounced that wrong, but she's going to correct me. Neha Naik is with us today. And Neha, it is so great to have you. Tell us first what that means.
Hey, Kenny, thank you for having me, and thank you to all the listeners tuning in right now and giving me your time. I really appreciate it. So Gyan actually means, Gyan is a Sanskrit word, and the meaning of the word is knowledge. And so I come from an Indian heritage, and I'm a daughter of a migrant family. And so my parents migrated here about it's been a while. I was 11 at the time, and I'm older now. So it's been about 25-ish years since we've been here. But I wanted to incorporate that because obviously, now I have two young kids of my own. And I wanted to continue that legacy of just remembering that those were our roots. And I feel like once I say it, it reminds me that, I come from India and I'm giving back to people here. And I'm American here, but I just love to have a little bit of infusion, so to speak.
Oh, I love that. That is awesome. I love that. I love that. You have got some great things that you do, very, very unique. I think you're evolutionizing what the recruiting industry looks and feels like. But I have to first, and I want to dive into all that, but I think it'll be so great for the audience to hear your backstory and what's led you to start your own recruiting firm like you have. What led you to that? What's your backstory?
Yeah, so actually in college, I wanted to become a doctor, only because I love Grey's Anatomy, and I was like, I could do this. And then I did a double major in biochemistry and psychology and a minor in chemistry. So obviously worked my butt off in undergrad, and then went to do a master's in medical sciences while I took my MCAT. And while I was doing my master's, I was like, you know what, this really isn't the right calling for me, but I'm not a quitter. And so I said, I'm going to finish out the master's, I'm going to finish out my thesis, and then I'm going to get a job until I figure out what to do. I mentioned I'm from an immigrant family. So when we had summers, sitting at home and watching TV and binging was not an option. My parents were very much like, you're going to get a job and you're going to work or you're going to study. You're not just going to be sitting at home Netflixing the whole time. And so I've never not worked. So finally, when I figured out medical school wasn't what I wanted, I was like, let me just apply to random jobs on Indeed and just see what's out there. And I actually got recruited as a junior recruiter at a medical clinic, so to speak. And so they were like, hey, someone's leaving on maternity leave. We would love for you to come. And I was like, okay, sure. Let's do it. Right. And I really liked it. I liked HR. This was my first exposure to recruiting in HR. And, I was successful at it. And so I got then recruited into, a couple of other companies and finally ended up at an oil and gas company in Houston. And because of the politically toxic culture there, I just couldn't handle it. At the time, my husband and I were about to get married. I I just don't like it. And so I decided to leave. And from there, I was like, I'm just going to cold call and hustle my way and just start getting clients of my own, right? Like I'll start with one client and then we'll go kind of go on from there. And that's really how the business was born, is just me cold calling and hustling. And I didn't even have a business name until my accountant was like, you know, you can have an LLC and expense a lot of these things instead of being a 1099 contractor. And I'm like, oh, cool. And then that's my husband and I were talking for dinner. And he was like, why don't you name it Recruit Gyan? And I was like, I love that. Like, let's go with that. So we opened the LLC on LegalZoom at like 10:30 p.m. on a Friday night after watching a movie. And that's really how my business was born, right? And now today I have over 45 people on my team, and we are now a 7-figure recruiting agency. So it's been a hell of a ride for sure. And I also have 2 kids. I have a 6.5 and a 3.5-year-old boy and girl. So incorporating that along with the motherhood journey, I've really learned a lot of things about myself and a lot of things about just recruiting in general.
Wow. Wow. That is just an amazing, amazing story. I love every second. I got chills actually when you said you now have 45 that's just fantastic. Congratulations on that. And what you do is so well needed. Before we dive in, I want to ask this first because I was so curious as I was going through your background and everything. How has recruiting changed in these last few years? What are some major things that you have seen that that you don't no longer do, and some new things that you actually do?
Yeah, I think, when I first started, recruiters were definitely given a lot of bad rap. And I understand that because there was a lot of people standing people up right from a recruiting standpoint. And from a company standpoint, I think companies were hiring people for the sake of hiring people to, just complete their deliverables, right? This play of diversity, equity, inclusion, culture wasn't really the forefront of topics when you thought of recruiting. Recruiting meant somebody quit or you were out opening a new role, you're going to get someone in there ASAP, right? And so it was very much a transactional relationship. And I think it's now much more evolved to where people are transparent and honest, and companies and recruiters hopefully are working together to really establish like the right candidates for their businesses, right? And then even for candidates, like if you are looking for a job, you care much more than just the salary or just the day-to-day. You want to make sure you have a purpose in where you're working, and you want to be able to contribute in a positive way. So I think the outlook of what recruiting means today has just really evolved, and it's just been really more of a dynamic thing instead of like, we have a role, let's fill this. Right now it's like, hey, we have a role, what's the need for this role? How do we convey that to our candidates? How do we convey that to our recruiters? How are you tracking the data? There's also obviously the infusion of AI and data-driven methodologies, right? And so a lot of our efforts have sped up. But what's interesting is AI is not going to be able to take over like human conversations, right? So we have to even stand above and beyond and really convey the humanistic attributes of a business to candidates as human beings, right? And really being able to separate that. So I definitely think in some ways things have streamlined, right? Like the grunt work has gotten much better because now AI and applicant tracking systems and data management systems are doing that. But it's really allowed for recruiters and companies to have this more humanized approach to recruiting, which I really love. And I think we're going to continue to see a trend in that.
Wow, that's so interesting. I want to get into your 3 pillars, and I love that a big part of your foundation is helping to, increase retention rates,
Mm-hmm.
which, again, in the industries that I've supported in the past, it's almost like been accepted. Hey, I'm just going to have high turnover. It's just part of the business. And you speak quite the opposite. So let's get into that. First impression systems. Tell us a little bit about that, because I love the 3 pillars that you have.
Yeah. So the first impression system. So yeah, let me touch base on a little bit on the retention. So when I
Yes.
recruit for my clients, and whether I'm helping you as a candidate find your next role, or I'm helping a client find their next employee, I don't just care about like recruiting you, but once I do recruit somebody, I want you to be happy there. And I want the company to be happy with whoever I place for years, right? Because recruiting is like sales. It's a lot more expensive to find a new client than it is to keep your current client happy and upsell them. And this is, a fact. This is not something that I've made up. And it's the same with recruiting. It's a lot more expensive when you have turnover, because as founders, you're then like your energy, your money, your time is going towards like, this person quit, we need to replace them. Now we need to onboard them. And that takes time. Like nobody can just start on Monday and know exactly what's going on, right? So retention has to be a focus when you retain or when you recruit, right? It cannot be something that you throw on the back burner. So all these three principles are based on that foundation, that we're not just recruiting high caliber talent, but we're ensuring that they're going to stay with you, right? That's the first thing. So first impression systems, where that comes into play is a lot of us, we are very much now like Google gurus, right? Like every time you hear a company, the first thing all of us is like, oh, what's that? Like, what is Threads? What's this? And we do this all the time. And so I always tell my clients, like, your first impressions mean a lot, especially in today's generation. So when somebody Googles your company, you better show up somewhere. If there's no social presence, if you're not active on any form of social media, if you don't have a website, if you don't have the names of your leaders out there, if you don't have any type of internet footprint, people are going to think you're a scam, right? Because as startups or as companies, you're also competing with the enterprise level companies, the companies that we all know of and talk about. So when you're competing with them, you have to have some type of a footprint, right? That's online. And I'm not saying like get on 50 million social media platforms today. I'm saying stick to one, stick to LinkedIn, but be active. Post on there once or twice a week. Talk about your open positions, talk about what you're doing, talk about your values, right? And so again, going into that first impression, people need to know your mission, your vision, and your values, right? Because again, that's a common ground for people and you to connect with. So if you're like, these are our values and this is what we're building and this is our vision, people are gonna be like, wow, I really like that you're doing that. Like, I've always thought about how this could be better. Because let's face it, we all start businesses to solve a problem, whatever that problem is. And unless you can effectively communicate that to your candidates, right? It doesn't matter how amazing your product or service is, but if you don't have a team, you're not gonna be able to make it for a long time. Like it's going to be really an uphill climb for you. So it's really important to really convey that, right? So again, having job descriptions that make sense and map out the candidate's journey, having an online presence where you're active, right? Having open and transparent communication. So the first time you talk to somebody, how are you talking about your business? Those things are so huge. And those things not just allow you to hire talent, but those things allow you to be transparent so that you can hold on to talent even after they're onboarded.
Mm. I tell you, what you say makes so much sense. And I think it matches the way the world is today, right? That people are looking for more. Do you still get pushback from employers saying, yeah, I don't want to be all that transparent, And
Yeah.
I mean, and what do you do with that? Because what you say just makes so much sense.
Yeah. So we actually have a very detailed service, like an intake with us, and we are very picky with who we work with for that reason. I am really honest. If I can't work with you, I will tell you, I will tell you very honestly and bluntly, like, this is not going to be a good partnership. I already see holes and cracks, and the foundation's weak, like you can't build a house. And so we have a quiz that we send to all our potential employers. And then once they fill it out, it scores you from a scale of 1 to 100. And it gives you like a percentage. And it tells you where you are on your first impression system. So like if you're scoring at a 50%, it also identifies the gaps. Like, hey, your LinkedIn looks really sketchy because there's no profile photo, right? Like it tells you exactly what's missing. And then they can hire us to help them fill it out, or they can take that and say, okay, I'm going to hire a content writer or whatever, and then I'm going to fix this all, right? And then I say, like, we only work with people who have an 80% plus score. And ideally I would like it to be 90, but like 80% is a good starting point. It's a point where like I can actually sell candidates on the positions that the company has open. So we have a pretty stringent kind of an intake process where, we waitlist people, or we say, hey, like, this is where you stand right now. You need to be here. So for us to work together, can you fix this in 2 weeks? And then we can start our engagement.
Yeah. I love that. I love that, because and you're ahead of the game here, because it has changed. I can remember years ago when I entered the workforce, someone at a company telling me, yeah, it's our privilege it's your privilege for you to work here, not so much ours. We're doing you a favor by hiring you. But there's still some companies that think that way. And so I'm so glad that you're looking to change that scope and helping companies to do that. It's so important. The first impression really works both ways. Cohesive culture method. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yep. So the cohesive culture method is exactly that. Is how do you build an organization that's a tight-knit family, and you are really respecting the culture of the organization, right? If you read the book by or listen to the book by Simon Sinek, it's called The Infinite Game, and he talks about infinite-minded leaders, and it's just an amazing read. And he talks about how you build this culture of transparency and honesty and inclusiveness, and the way that leadership builds a culture is the reason why a lot of people are going to be retained, right? So like if you've ever had, if you've heard like, hey, this leader left and all these people are giving their 2 weeks notice and they want to follow him, it's because that leader built this culture where, everybody was really happy and thriving, right? And what does a positive culture really mean? A positive culture to me means that once the employee turns off their laptop at 5 p.m. and they go downstairs, what is the mood that they're in? How are they giving back to the community? How are they acting towards their family? A place that has a positive culture is going to have happy employees because they're not going to be stressed about work. They're going to know exactly what their deliverables and deadlines are, what the communication is, what the transparency is. And so once they're done with work, they're going to be this happy person giving back to the community and their family. A not so happy employee is going to be cranky with everybody else. And we've seen that if we're not happy at our job, we're not, because we do spend a lot of our time at our jobs, right? And so when we're constantly complaining about it, we're not going to be a thriving individual of the community. So cohesive culture method, you're not just building a strong positive culture internally by offering the benefits that they need, by offering guidance, by offering any type of professional growth development program and opportunities, by listening to your team, right? Like doing anonymous surveys, and understanding what's not working, what's working, where's the burnout, where are people thriving, what can you do better as leaders? Once you have that in play, people are not going to want to leave you because they know that you respect their boundaries, you respect what they stand for, you respect their families and everything that's outside of their work periphery, so to speak, and you want to genuinely see them thrive, right? And they also feel like included as a company. So it's not just like, oh, I work for this company. It's like I'm part of this amazing organization that does so and so, right? And so that's kind of what you want to inculcate in employees when you think of cohesive culture method.
That is priceless advice, and I love how you very early, as you answered, how you combine the professional and personal. How does someone feel when they shut their laptop down, right?
Yep.
Do they go downstairs and they need to take a long walk afterwards because they're so frustrated, or do they, hey, what are we doing tonight? Let's go out to dinner. Or, I love that, and it makes so much sense, and it is such a reflection on what's happening during that work day on, because you also said this, which I found was interesting, how are those people are typically more involved in their community and doing other things outside of work. And I think that the great leader today can look at all of that to build those great cultures. I think that's brilliant. The Compass Leadership System, talk to us about that.
Yep. So the Compass leadership system really goes back to kind of the way that we think of leadership today versus a while back, right? So like back in the day, CEOs were like in the office somewhere in a tall building with this amazing suite with the door closed, right? But now the environment has changed, right? CEOs are very much, especially for startups. If you think about startups and companies that are truly making a difference, like CEOs are like these chill, casual people that are wearing t-shirts and hanging out, right? And
Right.
so I feel like it's the image of and what the leadership truly believes in, because I do feel like leadership is the compass, right? Leadership is going to decide which way the company's going, whether which product they're going after, which service they're selling that quarter, whatever that looks like. And so the leadership really has to have their head on their shoulders properly, right? And again, referring to Simon Sinek's book on the infinite game, you have to be an infinite minded leader. You have to think about the long term, right? And so not just looking at your employees as numbers, but your employees as people with different facets to their lives, right? And how are you respecting that? What kind of, again, benefits do you have for them? How are you encouraging them and motivating them? Are you being transparent, right, with what's happening in your business? I think all those things are so, so important, especially when you scale, because it's really easy when you're a smaller team. But once you start scaling, I
Yeah.
feel like you lose that authenticity. And then people are like, I don't know who the CEO is. Like, I mean, I know his name, but like, I've never talked to him. But having like all hands on deck meetings or doing like offering up your calendar as a leadership and saying, hey, here's my calendar. Jump in and say hi for 10 minutes. Let's have a coffee chat. Stuff like that really makes people feel like as a leader, you care about them and you're going above and beyond to really care about what they have to say. And when you get on these calls with them, I was working with a client and the team was about 200 people, which is a lot. And the CEO at the beginning of each month would say, I have blocked out 4 hours on this Friday for anybody who wants to jump on my calendar for 10 minutes. I'm going to be working. You can join me. You can say hi. You can introduce yourself. It was so cool. Like people felt like, wow, like this person who raised, $500 million for funding and has been on all these cool networks is like going above and beyond. Like that is a true leader, right? They really care. And I know that a lot of people are like, well, we don't have time, and that's not my job. That's HR's job. But it is your job. If you really
Absolutely.
want to build a company that lasts and build a workforce that you can retain, you have to make it a priority, right? And I think that's really what Compass leadership means, and also empowering other leaders within the organization, right? To be that person and not just get siloed into what they're doing, because it's so easy to get siloed in. But
Yeah.
if you really want to stretch your comfort zone and make your company the next best things out there, these are the things that are going to really truly matter.
Oh, there's no question. I think everything you said is just so spot on. I want, and those are fantastic, by the way. And there's no way you're not going to continue to be crazy successful following those three, because you're ahead of the game here. I want to stay on the leadership. This has been amazing. I want to ask you a couple more questions though, and get your advice for the leaders that'll listen. Um, for the leaders, what has been some changes that you've seen to the interviewing process? Or
Mm-hmm.
because I still see too many leaders that still do the old fashioned, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me,
Yeah.
what are some nuggets that they could take away on where the interview process is going these days?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I think of interview process, I think there's different components, right? So you have the technical fit, which is the person technically able to do the job? So if you're
Yeah.
hiring an engineer, are they able to be an engineer, right? That's like the main thing that a lot of people focus on. But then the other foundational assets that are so important is their motivation behind why they're joining the company, right? And culture, are they going to be able to add culturally to the business? Are they a learner? Are they someone who needs like micromanaging, or can they take a project and run with it? And finally, the logistics, which is the comp, the sponsorship, and all that. So when you interview, you don't want to just ask about like, okay, what's your experience and how many years like, that's great, but is this employee going to be coachable? Are they going to be able to say, hey, I know that this is kind of my job, but I saw that you're working on this project and I'd love to help. Like I have this Saturday off and I'd love to jump in and help. And I used to do this at my previous employer. And I used to be like, hey, I know that you're working on this. Like, I would love to help. Can I help put together a PowerPoint for you? Just showing, like, asking people if they're able to do this above and beyond, because that's a person who's going to contribute a lot. And that's a person that's going to not just be successful themselves, but make the company successful.
Yeah.
I would say definitely having interview questions around the whole roundedness of the person is important, and not just like, tell me about your experience in engineering, right? Like that, I think really matters. I think the second thing that I see a lot of people doing this is like, okay, I'm hiring for this person, and then they only talk to like one or two people and they make a decision super fast. And then they're like, oh, like we didn't interview them enough. So having a 3 to 4 step interview process, and like having other people on your team interviewing that person, because different people are going to bring different perspectives, right? So when you ask somebody else to help, like they're going to have a different perspective than what you have specifically. And then I always like to add in like a paid or technical assessment. So like, we do this in my business. I encourage my clients to do this, where it's like, hey, we're going to give you, your hourly rate is $25 an hour. Let's just say, I want you to work on this task for me for 2 hours and submit it by this date, and then I'm going to pay you because I understand you're taking time out of your precious day where you're working, your mom, whatever, and doing this. But this is for me to know if you just can talk the talk, but also walk the walk, right? Like there's a lot of people that will say, I do this and I do that and I have experiences then. And then you actually tell them to do it. And then it's like, I don't know, I was Googling it the whole time, right? And so again, it's a good way for teams to know if you are good to work together. And I think that's so good to know early on. And a lot of people are like, oh, we don't want to pay and all that, right? But when you pay someone, you're actually telling them that you respect their time. And
Yeah.
when you tell people that,
Yeah.
it's such a like different outlook on the interview process, and they're going to have more of a buy-in, and you're going to have more of a buy-in, right? And so when you make that decision, you know that you've checked all these steps so that you can make a hire, right? And then again, with hiring, I feel like you close the candidate on the first interaction, not just the offer call. So make sure your recruitment process, you are being as honest with them as possible. You're telling them exactly what you stand for, and give them an out, right? Like, hey, this was a really heavy call. You learned a lot about the company. How do you feel? Like, do you feel like this is a good fit for you? If not, it's okay. Give them an out. Don't assume that they like what you're saying, right? And it's okay, because you want to limit wasting time essentially. So you want to make sure you're giving them the space to make the decision, but then also telling them everything that you have to tell them right away. So when it comes to the option, it's an easy DocuSign, not like offer, negotiation and I want comp and I want this. You want to get all out of the way on your very first conversation with the candidate.
Wow. That is, I mean, that's just great advice all around. And you actually answered a couple other questions that I had there because I was going to ask about how do you know when you, what are some tip-offs when you have a bad hire? But I think if you're following all of your steps, I mean, it could still happen, right? But you minimize it so much more. And I love this suggestion on, I'm going to pay you for 2 hours to do this. Let's see what you really got,
Right.
And that definitely also will eliminate that really bad hire. I want to ask you this though, because I loved when I saw this. You said that you should be empathetic when recruiting, and I think that's been such a missing piece in the recruiting world. How do you do that?
Yeah, so empathetic means I always joke. I feel like recruiters were like counselors, therapists,
Yes.
friends, right? Like people talk to us about all kinds of things. And I love that. So empathetic first and foremost means obviously listening to them and not assuming and being able to tell early on if this person will be a good fit for your position, right? And I think the second thing about it is being as honest as you can be in a very respectful way, right? So if you know they're not going to be a good fit, anytime I do a phone screen, I typically let them know right away. Like, hey, I've loved talking to you for 30 minutes. I do have to say, though, I don't know that there's a match here for now, but let's stay in touch for future opportunities. Don't keep them hanging. I think this is where we get a bad rap is when we don't get back to people and nobody wants to like not know, right? Like, I would much rather know I didn't get something than not know for 3 months. And I think that's the worst feeling that any of us can have. And you know what I'm talking about. All the listeners, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've talked to somebody about interview, they promised you a role, and then you never heard back.
Oh my
It's a
God.
good punch. It really, hurts like, human psychology. And the third thing is you want to know that the world is a small place. You never know who you're going to talk to. So I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, I was working with somebody as a candidate. I placed her in the company. She got promoted within 9 months to a VP. And the HR leader quit. And she made it very clear that she only wants to work with my company for recruitment. So if I had not treated that client well, I would have lost that business. The world's a small place. You don't know where you're going to meet with people. So treat everybody with respect and be honest. Do not keep people hanging. It's the worst thing that you can do.
Oh man, I love that. And in your world, you're meeting, the two different sides at vulnerable places, right? If I'm out there looking for a position, certainly, I'm vulnerable there, but and if I'm an employer who I'm looking, I really desperately need somebody, I'm vulnerable there. I love everything you said. Nia, this has been amazing.
Thank you.
I love what you're doing and such a different perspective that you have on recruiting. And we need you. When I say we, the world, the business
Thank you.
world needs you. So please continue success and continue doing what you're doing. I want you to now, please, nice and loud. I'll make sure it's in the notes as well. But how can people work with you? How can they get in touch with you?
Yep. So you can find me on LinkedIn if you just type in Neha, Neha, Dixit, Dixit dash Naik. You'll find me there. You can go to my website, which is recruitgyan.com. And then you can email me at neha.naik@recruitgyan.com. But I know Kenny is going to put all this, so you don't have to write this down. If you're driving, don't worry about it. We will get the information to you, but there's so many ways to get in touch. And, please do, even if it's for a coffee chat. I just love to hear what other people are doing because I do feel like we tend to get siloed in. And so just networking is such a huge priority for me.
No doubt. No doubt. Well, you're amazing. You're an amazing leader, and you have got such a great perspective on this industry and all industries. So thank you so much. And you were so generous with your time today. So thank you for that. I so enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks, Kenny, for having me.
Absolutely. Well, so we'll leave it there, folks. This has been Kenny and Neha with the Leading from the Middle podcast, and we'll talk to you real soon.